You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 137. Today, I have a good friend of mine, actually one of my very first autism friends on the show, and we are going to be talking all about transitioning from high school to post-high school opportunities, including how to select and how to have your child do well in a college setting, if that's appropriate for him or her. Before I get to that introduction, though, I wanted to give a shout out to one of our podcast listeners who gave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. She said she's thankful for this podcast. I'm so thankful for this podcast. Mary has helped so many children and parents. Her methods are proven and work. Thank you, Mary. So thank you, V. Crystal, for that great shout out. And if you haven't given a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, I would love it if you would do that. I read all of them, and I would be happy to give you a shout out sometime in the near future. So today we are talking all about how to select a college, what kind of supports that kids need after high school, with our expert, who is Brenda Eaton. I met Brenda over 2 decades ago. She has been a mom to 2 neurodiverse adult children who are both successful. One of those children does have autism as well. Brenda went on to become a professional in the field. She's been a board certified behavior analyst for 11 years, and she's been in the field of autism for since her son was born 2 decades ago. So today we are just going to cover a lot of things, and Brenda does drop some statistics, even for typically developing kids who go to college, who may not be as successful as we want them to be. So let's get to this important interview with Brenda Eaton. Okay, so Brenda, it is so nice to talk to you. I haven't talked to you forever, and it's nice to have you on my podcast.
Well, it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, so I got a question from a friend of mine whose son, who has autism, is going to college for the first time in the fall. And I recommended that she might speak with you. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to check in with Brenda, and we're going to talk about college, and post-secondary education opportunities. But before we get to all of that and your extensive experience with that, I always like to start my interviews the same way, and which is describe your fall into the autism world.
Well, yes. So I had my daughter, who was 1.5 years, and my son was born. And about 1.5 years for him, his dad said, something's wrong. And I'm like, what do you mean? He sits there, he plays with one toy, he's quiet. What's the problem? So at that point, we took him for an evaluation. And my son really is the quiet one that would stare at a corner for hours on end and wouldn't learn anything. So not so much behavioral issues, at least not initially, but over time, he did develop some behaviors. We had him evaluated. I was one of those parents who had to chase the diagnosis for a little while. Finally got one at 3, and we did our home ABA program. I started that around 3, and we had 40 hours a week of ABA and all that wonderful stuff. And I had a parent call me. I think her name was Mary Barbera, and she wanted to come over and see my home program. And I said, sure, come on over. So that's where Mary and I met and where we got started. And we were conference buddies, going to every conference we could get our hands onto, and both of us doing our ABA thing. Mary took a faster direction because I had a day job that I still do. So yeah, that's where it started.
Yeah. So your kids are now in their 20s, And yeah, I went to a couple people's houses, Brenda's house, and I went to another friend's house. And the three of us, plus a couple other moms, also founded our local chapter of the Autism Society together in the year 2000. And we became, really fast friends. And I think there's a lot of people listening that have kids with autism. I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but I'm guessing that about 60 to 70% of our listeners are parents and the rest are professionals. But there are people like you and I who are both parents and professionals, or we had Bridget Taylor on the show and she's a sibling, which I didn't know of somebody.
Wow.
I'm not sure if it's autism or Down syndrome, but even the behavior analysts that I've interviewed over the years since I started the podcast, most of the times they fell into the autism world by responding to a little ad at their college and working with a child with autism. So we kind of all have a lot in common, but Brenda and I had a ton in common, and we're still friends. And you did go on to become a board certified behavior analyst, and you really are specializing to some degree in college coaching, and we're gonna dive into that as well. So, and the other thing, I'm curious because in my case, I had two boys back to back, 18 months apart. But I'm sure that you got some of you're comparing it to your daughter, and girls talk more than boys, and that sort of thing. Did you get a lot of that kind of poo-pooing your concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pediatrician's office was really not that helpful. Let's give it a little more time. I think that was the classic in our day, was let's give it a little more time. And that is obviously the opposite of what you want to do. You want to get on top of it as soon as possible. So he's a boy. Yeah, it's going to take him some time. So yeah, I think that was part of the challenge. And just I think a lot of times people were afraid to give the diagnosis because they, this feeling like they don't want to be the deliverer of bad news to the family, and that may be going through difficult times already. But I'm involved with a diagnostic program at work, and I don't know if it's just because they're already in early intervention and they're getting services, but they really tend to be kind of glad to be getting a diagnosis finally, so they understand what's going on and then they can help their child. So so just know that professionals out there who might be listening, if that's something you're involved with doing a diagnosis, it's definitely it really is a help to families to get that information as soon as possible.
Yeah. I know in my book, and I've done a video blog, we can link in the show notes, on the screening tool for autism in toddlers. And I know Brenda's been involved with her day job with really spearheading a huge project that involves, bringing developmental pediatricians out from necessarily just the teaching hospital inner city to more the suburbs, and trying to do stuff virtually and get families who are swimming around with 2 and 3 year olds to actually get the evaluation, which the waiting lists are just huge in most places. And I know Brenda's very much on the same page with where all of my stuff is, that we don't want to wait. We want to evaluate. We want to do helpful things with our kids, even while we're waiting, so that we can, get them caught up in every area possible, as caught up as possible. So how did you, since we're going to really focus, we could spend a whole show on that project and the stat and all that stuff, but we're going to focus on college, and because very few people have this kind of expertise. Absolutely. And so how did you get interested in learning more about the post-high school programs, including college?
I think it was probably from having children that are, getting older, both neurodiverse individuals. My daughter really has a processing speed disorder. She never had an IEP, but, we saw the challenges out, when she got home, then she would have a meltdown because she had 8 hours of homework, she basically needed 100% extended time. So she was really getting overwhelmed with the work. She's very detail oriented. So, and then Brendan on the autism spectrum, also having some anxiety, OCD, some other issues. Like, what's it going to look like? And trying to figure out what, transition, into high school, what's high school going to look like? And then after that, what's going to happen afterwards? I really didn't know. So Brendan, is he going to be able to go to college? I had nothing to go on. There's nothing to go by. I couldn't find anything. And I'm like, I need to figure this out so that he has choices. And, I brought this passion into the work that I do, help develop a high school type transition program, kind of a bridge to college where kids are staying overnight and they are able to experience staying overnight in a dorm, what it's like to wake themselves up, take their medication, get their shower, get to class. So it really was just me trying to figure things out. So it was probably when they were like 13, 14 years old.
Okay. And you, at some point, became a certified college coach. Is that what you're considered?
Yeah, the credentialing, if you will, is there's no credentialing if you put it up next to a BCBA. So I had 4 days of training, but it was through Bank Street College, and there are very well-educated, knowledgeable people who also took that course. I think it ran for about 5 years, and there, maybe 20 people in each cohort. And they were really looking to target the people in the Office of Disability Services at colleges, because every college has to have an Office of Disability Services, but they're going to be different at every college. Yeah. So the fact that they're different at every college, the ones that were, into this were taking this course, so they knew how to better address the autism population, the individuals coming in to meet their needs better. So I think that was really the key with that. So a lot of the participants, I think, were in Office of Disability Services at university.
Okay. So every college needs an Office of Disability Services that because they get some funding. And so that's a requirement for years, even before you were involved. Is that true?
I can't speak to where the funding comes from,
right.
But every university is mandated to have an Office of Disability Services, probably from under ADA. So when did that get established? I couldn't answer that, but yes, it was there before I started rolling with this, and it's still there.
Okay. Yeah. It's good to know. And I know personally, because I do know, several kids, former clients, and like my friend's son who are going to college. And so I know that a lot of schools, in addition to having an Office of Disability Services, actually have programs specifically for kids on the autism spectrum or students on the autism spectrum. So I think that's becoming more and more. So if you are listening out there and you have a child who's on the autism spectrum or has any kind of disability, like you mentioned, your daughter has processing problems. I know my nephew has dyslexia. And so it doesn't have to be autism. It could be any kind of disability or learning difference. You should call, or you and your child should call together or go meet with the Office of Disability Services to see if you can get extended testing time or private and help and tutoring and that sort of thing. And you would be able to speak to like all the kind of services that you could be eligible for. But before we get to that kind of thing is like, not everybody listening, and in fact, probably the majority of people listening, their kids aren't going to be able to go to a 4-year college. I know I interviewed Amy McFarland recently. She's another behavior analyst with us on, and he tried to go to 4-year college. She didn't really think it was going to necessarily work out, and he ended up doing a 2-year college or transferring to a technical school. And there's not 4-year college isn't the be all end all for a lot of kids, even kids not on the spectrum. But can you kind of speak to how do you know, say you have a 12-year-old or 15-year-old or 18-year-old, like
Mhm.
what should you be looking at to see, like what
Okay.
should we do?
Yeah, I know. And I hear you talking, and it's like, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. There's so much to talk about with this. so, yeah. So, there's, looking at schools and so forth. And well, you want, first thing would probably be seeing if your child's even interested in going to college, because you want to think about the whole college thing. Is college for them, or is college really for you? Because if it's just the fact you want your kid to go to college and they don't necessarily want to, or don't know, or aren't really interested, you could be setting yourself up to spend money, or have them in debt, or have them to set them up for a bad time and feel bad about themselves when it really probably wasn't a good fit. So the things to be looking for, things you can do is be looking at universities and colleges with your child to maybe see if that's something at all they're interested in. The Office of Disability Services would come after you apply. But, you do want to be looking at those places, those universities that have those have good disability services. So the other things to be looking at, the things that are going to be challenging, the IQ, I hate, IQ isn't really an issue, because somebody can have an IQ of 100. I've worked with a student that had an IQ of like 140. And when he went off to a summer college program, he never went to the cafeteria. He lost like 20 pounds. So they need to have the life skills. So don't equate IQ with independence. That ability to have adaptive skills, the tests that they do for adaptive skills, you need to consider those things. So, if they're staying at home, that's a safe place. And then going to college, you don't have to worry about eating, laundry, cleaning up, safety, and all of that kind of thing. But if you're thinking of sending them off to a 4-year school that isn't close to home, or is, going to be a lot of independence, you're switching their whole world around. You're 100% changing their environment, the way they need to function. And that's a big step. And I just want to share statistics, because I agree. Typical kids. This is a statistic from the National Clearinghouse for Education, that first semester freshmen, 30%, a third, flunk or fail out or leave. So just know, out of all freshmen, this is a national statistic in the US, that 33% around in there don't make it, or they only stay for the first semester, or don't make it through their first semester. So just keep that in mind.
And that's not even graduating in 4 years. That's just making it through the first semester. Wow.
Right. So those that make it through 4 years, only 40%. Those that stay, only 40% make it in 4 years. The rest finish in 5, 6, 7 years. So,
wow.
Yeah. And, parents don't know.
Those are sobering statistics, boy. Woo.
Yes, that's why. Yeah. I mean, so even what I do, it helps typical families, families with other kids as well, just because we don't know. There's such a barrier between high school and college. They don't talk to each other. And just there's a lack of understanding. High school doesn't necessarily prep kids for college, and college doesn't understand the way high school functions. And, once they leave public education, there's no more entitlement, it's eligibility, and that changes everything.
I do have a follow-up question about IQ. Those were really good statistics too. I had no idea about those. So you mentioned the boy you worked with who had a really high IQ, and I did a video blog on IQ and autism, and we can link that in the show notes, because I think, IQ, a quote unquote normal IQ is 100. And so 140 is a very, gifted range. And then if you get 70 or below, that's considered intellectual disability. And, and a lot of listeners, because they're familiar with my first book, The Verbal Behavior Approach, and it's like, most of my work centers around helping kids either very young, 1 to 5, doesn't matter if they just have a speech delay or ADHD or what it's going to turn out to be, how severe it is, doesn't matter, 1 to 5-year-old. And then the older kids, I tend to focus on the language ability of a 1 to 5-year-old. So if you're 15 and have a language ability of a 4-year-old, then you're going to also have an intellectual disability, whether or not it's diagnosed or not. But there are a lot of kids with a lot of scattered skills. And so it's confusing. They might have gotten an early IQ test that maybe was in 60s or 70s. And, they may have improved with therapy and maybe got it up to 80 or whatever. But like, is there and Lucas's IQ has always been pretty much in the 60s. So for him, language age and language age and self-care. And, it became apparent that Lucas is not going to be able to go to college. Like that became apparent at 7, 8, 9, 10. But for some kids, it really is hard to tell. Like I remember running into an acquaintance, and I happened to have worked with her son in a classroom, and he was in 9th grade. And she's like, I don't know what he's going to end up, kind of like Brendan, like, where is he going to go after high school? And I remember him being very scattered. So like, so I was just like, does he have an IQ score? Does he have academic achievement scores? Like, because he is so scattered. And she had nothing in, no information. But like, is that wise to tell people to get that information? Are there cutoffs? Like if you have an IQ of 50, like you can't go to college, or like, what are your thoughts about IQ on the low end?
Okay. So for me, I have a real problem with IQ testing in general.
Yeah.
It's language based. So how do you expect a child that doesn't have language to be tested for their intelligence when it's language based? So just for me, and I have a whole thing that we probably don't have time to talk to, and, that others believe in, that we have that medical model, but we really need to move into a social model, which, is another story and another show. So
you could become a regular guest.
Yes, exactly. But I really think a big part of it, and I know for Brendan, and I've gotten permission to talk about Brendan. Brendan he is kind of, he is neurodiverse. He really is. So he has autism. Then he got an ADHD diagnosis. Well, I'm sorry, ADD diagnosis. So that was, obviously the autism was at 3, the ADHD was, 13, 14. So he has attention deficit. It's not really that hyper. And then, so that's a scatteredness. And then along 17, he got the anxiety OCD diagnosis. So every time there's a co-occurring condition, it can slightly change the way the diagnosis looks. So for Brendan, he also has dyslexia. So, we finally found all these different pieces, but you know what? He's a whole person. And I spent so much time thinking I never thought he'd be able to go to college, and be able to live independently and all that, because I didn't have anything else to base it on. That's what happens to kids with autism, back in our day. That's, 20 years ago, kind of what the belief was. But the idea that if they have the ability to live independently, I think if that's really where you want to consider it. And it really is based on the program. So there are a lot of programs popping up out there. Comprehensive transition programs are what they're called. Everyone's different. The one for Brendan, he lives independently on campus. He has his own dorm room. He gets himself up, gets a shower, takes his pills, gets his breakfast. Hey, I need an hour before class. He knows what he needs. Gets to class, does all of the things he needs. He has a coach. So he has a coach that helps him with looking over what he's got due, what his syllabus is, what he's got to do for the week, how is he going to tackle this, that, and the other. And so, that works for him. So I think the level of independence is a variable. So, every student's different. For Brendan, he can participate in college courses. He took anthropology. He's in applied engineering. And, for him, he has trouble with processing and the dyslexia piece. So taking tests, he would have flunked out first semester. So he is on their track for a 4-year certificate. And so he is still taking the test, still doing the same projects and everything, but he doesn't get a grade. So he will get a certificate for the 4 years. And the big thing he wanted me to ask was, do you really think my piece of paper is different than somebody else's piece of paper who took all the tests and everything? So, if it's something you're interested in and engaged in, you're going to learn it. If you just memorize it, study it, and put it back out on a test, what's the difference? So I think, a big part of the difference is interest. Do they want to do this? Do they want to be involved? Do they want to be there? Are they able to be independent to a certain extent? So I think those are all key pieces.
Right. And, even for kids like Lucas who, don't have the ability to even stay at home for an hour while I run to the store, need 24/7 care. That doesn't mean that, the bus stopped coming at 21 and he's going to sit around with no help or service or opportunities either. So, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. And I do want to focus on college, but that, this whole conversation I think is good because it's like, there's no race to the finish line. It's all different for all kids, whether they have autism or not. There are programs and, Brendan's in a program where it's not a 4-year degree, but he's going to a 4-year college and he's working on transitional skills and independent skills and studying and taking classes, but there's not that pressure. Like you've got to have, I'm sure he doesn't take like 16 credits per semester and that sort of thing. Like it's probably
12.
Okay. So
semester,
it's less. So even kids that are in college. So let's talk about like your college coaching business. When you go in to support a child, well, an adult in college, a college student, what kind of things, just like think about your, top 2 kind of profiles of how a college coach could help?
Sure. So I really think it's good for me to first off connect with them and say, look, I'm not going to judge. I'm not here to judge you or put any extra pressure on you. But what do you think about college? Where do you want to be? What do you want to do? And just trying to make a personal connection, pairing with them, obviously. Also wanting to really kind of get a handle on their executive function skills. When you go to college with needing accommodations from the Office of Disability Services, I might ask for the same testing. So I can look at that and I can see, okay, he needs 100% extended time. They did the brief, which is an assessment for executive function. I can see his working memory is really low. I can see, what those skills look like. And executive function is really a big part of it. Being able to, I've had training in executive function. Yes, I've had the autism college coach, but I've also had coactive coaching training. I've also had executive function training. I do executive function training, but being able to connect the pieces to understand where it is, where their weaknesses are, what their strengths are, and being able to use their strengths to help support those weaknesses is key, and trying to get them into a system that they're comfortable with. And the key piece about coaching is you're turning the responsibility over to them. I'm not writing down a list and say, here, make sure you do this for next time. They're making their list. Okay. So you'll ask questions. What worked for you last time? How did you do this last time? Did you keep a schedule? Did you make a list? And ask them what works. If they draw a blank, then it's like, can I make some suggestions? and then they get to pick from your suggestions. So this is causing them to be internalizing this information, developing the agency they need in order to be successful. Now, can I promise you that coaching is going to make them successful? I can't promise that, but that support is there, and executive functions can be learned. There is more coming out all the time about executive functions. They can be learned. And, you know, if the student is motivated to do it, I'll tell you, a student that had was getting C minuses and D's in his class, he had grit, man. Let me tell you, he had grit. When you told him, and he's like, I'm going to pass this class. And, you know, he was determined, you know, and we worked, and he got a better grade. So that grit piece is a big piece too. So what I do is I do those kinds of things. I might give them a grit scale. I might, you know, it really depends. I do values, definitely upfront. You know, what are your values? Because if they're telling me money, wealth, and success, we're going to have a tough time. So, you know, if it's honesty and, you know, family, you know, different things, you know, more typical things, you know, we can work those values in. Well, you know, we're doing this so that you can have a successful career, so that you can have, you know, your independence. And, you know, if they want to have a family, so you can have a family, have your own. So, you know, trying to pull in that agency and what they want to be. And it's tough because, you know, with autism, we know it's a developmental delay. So, you know, maturity takes a little time, takes a little longer to cook. So thinking about family or something like that might be tough, but finding out what's motivating them and helping that pull them through what they need to do to motivate them, you know, is important.
Yeah. And these Office of Disabilities, they do also, you know, can connect students to tutoring or writing help or whatever. But a lot of college students on the spectrum might have those executive functioning problems that they can't coordinate, or like they don't think it's worth it to go to another person. It's too overwhelming, I would think.
Wow.
And so part of the role, there's not like a ton of college coaches around. Like
No.
we're gonna, you know, there are parents out there that are going to have to kind of take the role of almost the coach. Do you recommend like that? Is that a bad idea, or?
Well, I think the thing to be thinking about there, I'm not opposed to that. I know people who have done that. Thank God for Zoom. It totally makes it possible. But at some point in time, you know, you have, you know, parent, you need to kind of think about yourself and your well-being. And also, it's so true. They're going to be more responsive to somebody other than parent. They're not going to look stupid. They're going to want to be on the ball. That you have a good rapport. They're going to want to do well for that person. So really having a separate, you know, a separate relationship with someone else is really beneficial. It really makes it really kind of, you know, cuts it into, oh, I am really starting to develop my independence here. I've got to work with this person and I have to be responsible. So, you know, they have to meet with me. I may say, let's have 3 check-ins this week. Check in with me Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Let me know if you did this, that, or the other. You know, I may have something I've assigned them to do to be checking in with me. And, you know, if they don't do those check-ins, and again, it's not about, well, you didn't do it. It's about, okay, we agreed on 3 check-ins. So tell me what happened. You know, what happened? Why, what happened? Did you just forget? Okay. All right. Well, let's try something else. What do you think would work instead? Oh, you want to write it in your agenda book? That's a great idea. Let's do that. Let's try that. So they usually come around to the things that they've been beaten over the head with in high school to use, or they have another way. You know, maybe they're going to put a Post-it on the bathroom mirror to do something because they're going to brush their teeth or whatever, and they're going to see it, and that's going to prompt them to do it. So it's about them coming up with the ideas and them coming up with the strategies. So.
Yeah. Wow, there seems like there's a lot. Are there any books on the subject of like how to get a kid to go to college,
Um,
like independently, successfully? I know there's like executive functioning books and that sort of thing,
mhm.
but it seems like there's a lot of information. Like how do people,
Yeah.
even start the process?
Yeah, there are books that are like how to go to college with a learning disability or something like that that talks about
Mm,
switching from IDEA to ADA and
okay.
entitlement versus eligibility and what you need to advocate for. Because please know there's no specially designed instruction in college. They're not going to reduce the number of questions. They're not going to adjust anything. You can just add things like extra time on tests, note takers, things like that. So it's completely different. I forgot what we were talking about
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, no, I think that's
Sorry.
good. No, this is great information. So, and then there are other options. There's community colleges, there's technical schools, there's
Yeah.
VOTech,
Yep.
um, uh, apprenticeship,
Yes. Yes.
just working, even
Mm-hmm.
that for many kids is such a challenge. And it sounds like what you're describing with, asking them what their goals are and values and okay, that didn't work out this week. What do you want to try next week? Here's some suggestions. I mean, it sounds like your role as a behavior analyst really this is yet another tool and breaking things down and
Yeah.
having goals so I think there are a lot of behavior analysts, but not necessarily working with kids that
Yeah.
are high enough functioning to go to college, plus
Right.
who's going to pay for it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure at
Mm-hmm.
21 that becomes a big issue. Um, so how is this stuff funded? And we have listeners from over 80 countries, so we can't
Mm-hmm.
get too specific about the United States or a specific state, but in general, is there ever funding for college or these transitional programs or boat tech after 21?
Um, so the comprehensive transition programs, they're called, at least that's what it was when we started 4 years ago for Brendan. They actually, the program's considered a comprehensive transition program. Can actually, you can apply for a student loan just like you can for any other college program. So that is becoming more and more widespread. If you are interested in checking out colleges, and this is a range of colleges because there's another college in Pennsylvania that I know of that has a different program, but it's for I'm not sure it's a comprehensive transition program, but it is a program for individuals with autism that I think a little more behavioral challenges and so forth. But whatever the program, if it's a comprehensive transition program, they can apply that way. They can get college loan funding. Other types of funding, I am blessed with the state that I live in has a wonderful waiver program. My son gets his waiver to pay part of his program. OVR, opposite vocational rehabilitation, is also paying for part of his program. So OVR will, and you have to make it in the frame of employment that they need to go to school to do what he wants, for whatever the individual wants to do, they need to get an education, a college degree or whatever degree to be able to be successful and be employed. So then OVR will pay for it. Other things to think about, I know in my area and some places have, we talked about technical schools, CTE programs. They are becoming more and more prevalent and less, like as we know them, VOTech, they are getting kids their licenses before they, when they leave high school. They can be the NOCTI exam. They can take the NOCTI exam and be ready to go off and do HVAC and fix air conditioners, and they make good money. So there's lots of ways of looking at things. But other than that, private funding, I have looked into OVRs being a provider through OVR, but that would just be like in the state of Pennsylvania. I don't know where it would work otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, the funding.
And then there is
challenge.
some private pay situations, like in your situation. And then one other thing I thought I would mention is that in the United States, at least, age 14 is the time in IDEA when high schools are required to start planning for that post-high school transition. Is that correct?
It's 16 nationally. It's 14 in Pennsylvania.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So there is a transition age. And so that's another really good thing to point out is, but even if you have a 12-year-old with an IEP, you could start talking about it. But at age 14 or 16, whatever your state is, the transition age, that's when you could begin to explore VOTEC. You could begin to explore, like Lucas went to a restaurant and started volunteering there with an aide and a behavioral therapist as part of his school day, bused there by school to see, does he enjoy it? Is it safe? Is it, something that is a good fit? He went to a hotel and did laundry. So, in Brendan's situation, he went as part of high school to maybe a program that could explore HVAC or something else. You know what I mean? Like there's summer programs, there's programs during the school year. And if you are in school in the United States, then those kind of explorations would often be covered almost always by the school district to explore that post-high school trade or volunteer or programming. Yeah. So I did want to mention that. And so even in the United States, again, school can go till 21. So you could even potentially, you would need to maybe get an advocate or read more. But you could, possibly have your child be done with high school at 18, start community college. Maybe that could be paid for under your school district, as long as they don't graduate when they're 18. So there are different funding streams depending on where you are in the world to look at. So I think I learned a ton here. I'm hoping that listeners did too. So a couple questions before we wrap up. First, how can people? You also do some life coaching that doesn't even have to do with autism or learning disabilities, but I know that the listeners here will be most interested to hear your thoughts on executive functioning in colleges and post-high school. So where can they find you, Brenda?
So I have a website. It's brendaeaton.life. So there is where you can find me and kind of talk about my perspective. I have gone on to get other interesting training like acceptance and commitment therapy. And I also, positive behavior. Sorry, not positive behavior, but positive psychology, which is really about health and well-being, and really trying to bring that into practice with professionals, parents, everyone, with the kids, everyone. So just really wanting, quality of life for everybody. Like there's, we need to stop judging and, being so hard on ourselves and hard on others around us, and really want to provide opportunity. A lot of what I do during the day is social emotional learning, providing those trainings to schools and working with students to be bringing that kind of resilience, helping them with resilience is a big part of what my goal is with that. So whether it's a school district, administrative, teacher, or parent, or an individual, people say you should focus, but my focus is what I do, and it applies to everybody. So yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So Brenda Eaton, EATON.life is Brenda's website, which it leads us perfectly into the last question. Part of my podcast goals are not to just help the kids, but for parents and professionals listening to be less stressed and lead happier lives. So, with all of your background, do you have any self-care advice or stress reduction tips?
Yeah. So I think what is really important, and just because as human beings we have a negativity bias, it's just because of the way we are. We always focus on what's wrong instead of what's right. And it's been tough this past year. So I think it's really important. And science shows that thinking of things you're grateful for. So, you can focus on the things that are problems, but don't ruminate about them. All we have is now, and being present in the moment. So having a mindful moment, thinking about the things that you're grateful for, even towards the end of the day, is, I think, the best strategy you can have. And they say if you do that for a week, Martin Seligman, who is like the guru on positive psychology, you can have increased happiness and well-being up to 6 months. So I think that's really wonderful strategy. I also want to say that if anybody wants more information on any of the services, or particularly college, I'm going to have something up at BrendaEaton.life/ready. So, we'll have that information there that you can get that, and we can get you connected with more information if you like.
Good. So you're going to have something up on your website to talk more about getting ready for college or for post high school transitioning. So that'll be at BrendaEaton.life/ready.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So I love this talk. I learned a lot, and hopefully it's helped a lot of our listeners out there. And we usually do a lot of talks for parents of younger kids and professionals, but we do have, our kids are always getting older, and
Yes, they do.
we need to continue to help kids as they grow into adults, whether they have autism or not. And this is a great way to share the wealth of information. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mary. Great seeing you.
If you're a parent or early intervention professional working with young children with signs of autism, or if you're a parent or professional helping older children with moderate to severe autism, you'll definitely want to order my new Turn Autism Around book today. You'll get access to all the book resources that will help you right away. For all the details, go to turnautismaround.com.